The morning Violet Winters found her husband dead in the barn, she did not yet know that her grief would become the least of her sorrows. She stood there in the straw-scattered shadows of that April dawn in 1883, her 23-year-old hands trembling as they reached toward Thomas's cold face, and all she could think was that he looked peaceful in a way he never had in life. The doctor would later say it was his heart, weakened since childhood, that simply gave out during the night. But Constance Winters, Thomas's mother, would tell a different story entirely. The funeral took place 3 days later under a relentless Nevada sun that beat down on the small cemetery outside Bodie, California. Violet stood beside the grave in her black mourning dress, her auburn hair pinned severely beneath her veil, and tried to ignore the weight of Constance's stare from across the open earth. They had never been close, she and her mother-in-law. Thomas had been Constance's only child, born late in her life after a string of miscarriages, and she had guarded him with a fierce possessiveness that had not diminished even after his marriage 2 years prior. But Violet had tried. Lord knows she had tried to win the older woman's affection, to prove herself worthy of the Winters name. She had no idea that Constance had been planning her destruction since before Thomas's body was even cold. It started small. A comment here, a suggestion there. Constance mentioned to Margaret Halstead at the general store that Violet had seemed strangely calm when she discovered Thomas's body. She told Reverend Patterson that her son had complained of stomach pains in the weeks before his death, always after eating meals Violet prepared. She wondered aloud to the Ladies' Church Auxiliary whether it was not suspicious that Violet, a woman of modest means before her marriage, would now inherit the small but prosperous ranch Thomas had worked so hard to build. Bodie was a mining town, perched high in the Sierra Nevada mountains, its population swollen with men seeking silver and gold. It was rough and bustling, with more saloons than churches, but it still held tight to certain codes. A woman's reputation was fragile as spun glass, and once shattered, impossible to mend. Constance Winters knew this. She had lived in Bodie for 30 years, had connections, had respect, and she wielded these weapons with cold precision. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, Violet began to notice the change. Women who had once greeted her warmly on the street now crossed to the other side to avoid her. The butcher's wife refused to serve her, claiming they were out of everything she requested, even as Violet could see the meat hanging in plain view. Children were called inside when she walked past as if she carried some contagion. At first she could not understand it. She tried to speak with Margaret Halstead, who had been friendly before, but Margaret's face went hard as stone, and she turned away without a word. It was Clara Jensen, the young wife of a mine foreman, who finally told her the truth. Clara found Violet sitting alone on a bench outside the assayer's office and took pity on her. "Mrs. Winters," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper, glancing around to make sure no one saw them speaking. "I do not believe what they are saying, but you should know. Constance has been telling everyone that you poisoned Thomas. She says she has proof. She says she found arsenic in your kitchen." The words hit Violet like a physical blow. For a moment she could not breathe, could not think. "That is insane," she finally managed. "I loved Thomas. I would never have hurt him. The doctor said it was his heart." "I know," Clara said, and there was genuine sympathy in her eyes. "But Constance is very convincing. And people want to believe the worst sometimes. It makes them feel better about their own lives." She reached out as if to touch Violet's hand, then thought better of it and withdrew. "I am sorry. I just thought you should know what you're facing." Violet tried to fight back. She went to the sheriff, a grizzled man named Dobbins who had been in Bodie since before the boom. But when she demanded he investigate Constance's claims, he simply looked at her with tired, skeptical eyes and asked why she thought Constance would lie about her own son's death. "She is grieving," Violet said desperately. "She needs someone to blame, and I am the easiest target. Please, Sheriff, you must see that there is no evidence. The doctor said it was natural causes." Doc Patterson is old, Dobbin said slowly. Maybe he missed something. Mrs. Constance Winters is a respected woman in this town, known her for decades. You have been here, 3 years? And only married to Thomas for 2 of them. So that makes me a murderer. Did not say that. But I cannot go accusing Constance of slander without cause, now can I? If you are innocent, the truth will come out. But in Bodie, the truth had no chance against Constance's poison. The older woman had been careful, had planted her seeds in the most fertile ground. She showed people a small bottle she claimed to have found hidden in Violet's wardrobe, labeled as rat poison. She wept convincingly to anyone who would listen about her poor boy, stolen from her by a greedy, cold-hearted woman. She even implied that Violet had taken other lovers, that Thomas had been planning to leave her, that the marriage had been unhappy. None of it was true. Violet and Thomas had been happy, or as happy as 2 people could be when one was sickly and the other was working herself to exhaustion trying to keep a ranch afloat. They had laughed together, planned for a future, talked about children they might have. It had not been a grand passion, but it had been real and good and solid. And now Constance was taking even the memory of that and twisting it into something ugly. By the end of the month, Violet's world had collapsed entirely. The bank refused to honor Thomas's will, claiming that the estate was under investigation pending resolution of serious questions about his death. She could not access the money she needed to run the ranch. The ranch hands quit, unwilling to work for a woman accused of murder. Suppliers refused to deliver goods. The few people who had shown her kindness before now looked through her as if she did not exist. She tried to endure it. She stayed in the small house she and Thomas had shared on the edge of the ranch property, rationing the food she had left, trying to care for the animals alone. But Constance was not content with mere ostracism. She wanted Violet gone. It was a Saturday night in late May when things came to a head. Violet was in the kitchen preparing a meager dinner of beans and cornbread when she heard the sound of voices outside. Many voices. She went to the window and felt her blood turn to ice. There were perhaps 24 people gathered in her yard, many of them carrying torches despite the fact that the sun had not yet fully set. She recognized faces from town, miners, shopkeepers, even some women. At the front of the group stood Constance Winters, her face set in hard, righteous lines. "Violet Winters!" Constance's voice rang out. "Come out and face your accusers!" For a moment, Violet considered barricading herself inside, but she knew that would only make things worse. With shaking hands, she smoothed her skirt, checked that her hair was neat, and walked out onto the porch. The crowd surged forward slightly at her appearance, and she had to force herself not to step back. "What is this?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" "Justice," Constance spat. "You murdered my son, and this town has let you walk free long enough. The sheriff will not do his duty, so we will do it for him." "I did not murder anyone," Violet said, louder now, looking past Constance to the faces behind her. "Thomas died of a weak heart. The doctor confirmed it. These are lies, all lies, spread by a woman mad with grief who cannot accept that her son was simply ill." "She lies even now?" Constance turned to the crowd, playing to them like an actress on a stage. "I found poison in her home. I heard my son beg for his life. She wanted his money, wanted his land, and when he refused to give her control of everything, she killed him." "That is not true," Violet was shouting now, desperate. "Thomas never said any such thing. You are inventing stories. Why? Why would you do this to me?" For just a moment, something flickered across Constance's face, something that might have been satisfaction. "Because you were never good enough for my son," she said quietly. And in that moment, Violet understood that this had never really been about Thomas's death at all. This was about control, about jealousy, about a mother who had never been willing to share her son's affections. "You should never have married him, and now you will pay the price." The crowd was getting restless, feeding off each other's energy. Someone shouted that they should burn the house. Someone else suggested tar and feathers. Violet saw a length of rope in one man's hands and felt true terror grip her heart. "You have until morning to leave body," Constance announced. "Pack what you can carry and go. If you are still here when the sun rises, we will drive you out ourselves, and it will not be gentle." "This is my home," Violet protested, but even as she said it, she knew it was a losing battle. "Thomas left it to me. You cannot just force me out." "Watch us," said Marcus Brennan, who owned the largest saloon in town. He stepped forward, his face flushed with drink and righteousness. "We do not want murderers in our town. Women who kill their husbands deserve no mercy." There was a chorus of agreement. Violet looked from face to face, searching for any sign of sympathy, of reason. She found none. Even the few people who might have doubted the accusations were staying silent, unwilling to go against the mob. "Fine," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I will go. But you are making a terrible mistake. All of you. You are letting that woman destroy an innocent person, and someday you will realize what you have done." "Save your breath," Constance said coldly. "Be gone by dawn." The crowd dispersed slowly, many of them lingering as if hoping for more drama. Violet went back inside on shaking legs and closed the door. Then she slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the wood, and finally let herself cry. Great, gasping sobs that tore from her chest and echoed through the empty house. She cried for Thomas, for the life they had planned, for the terrible injustice of what was happening. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was hollow and numb. Then she stood up, dried her face, and began to pack. She could not take much. One carpet bag of clothes, a few personal items, what little money she had managed to hide, the photograph of her parents, long dead, a quilt her grandmother had made. She looked around the house one last time as the moon rose outside, at all the little touches she had added to make it a home. The curtains she had sewn, the chair Thomas had surprised her with for her birthday, the marks on the door frame where they had been planning to measure their children's heights someday. All of it lost, all of it poisoned by Constance's lies. Just before dawn, Violet walked out of the house for the last time. She locked the door behind her, knowing it was a futile gesture, and began the long walk into town. She had no horse. The animals had been sold off or had simply disappeared in the chaos of the past weeks, so she walked, carrying her heavy bag, as the sun began to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. She made it perhaps 2 miles before exhaustion forced her to stop. The bag was too heavy. Her shoes were not meant for long walking, and she had not eaten properly in days. She sat down on a rock beside the dusty road and tried to figure out what to do next. Where could she even go? She had no family, no friends who would risk helping her. Virginia City was about 30 miles northeast, but she could hardly walk that far. Carson City was even farther. She was still sitting there, trying not to give in to despair, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. She looked up to see a lone rider approaching from the south, leading a pack horse behind him. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, dressed in worn work clothes and a battered hat. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. He slowed as he approached, clearly taking in the sight of a woman alone on the road at dawn with all her possessions in a single bag. His eyes, she noticed, as he stopped his horse a few feet away, were a striking pale blue like water over stone. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and slightly rough from disuse. "You all right?" Violet almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. All right? She was homeless, penniless, accused of murder, cast out by everyone she knew. But something about the stranger's straightforward manner made her answer honestly instead of dismissing him. "No," she said simply. "I am not all right, but thank you for asking." He dismounted in one smooth motion and came a few steps closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "You are that woman from Bodie," he said, and it was not a question. The one they are talking about. Violet felt her stomach sink. So the news had spread even beyond the town. "Yes," she said tiredly, "I am that woman. Violet Winters. Murderer, apparently, though I never hurt anyone in my life. I suppose you will want to keep your distance unless you want people talking about you too." The stranger tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that should have been unsettling, but somehow was not. "Name is Quentin Garrett," he said, "and I have never put much stock in town gossip." "Then you are one of the few," Violet said bitterly. "I was in Bodie yesterday," Quentin continued as if she had not spoken. "Heard all about it. About Constance Winters and her accusations. About the mob last night." He paused. "Also heard from Doc Patterson, who mentioned to me over a whiskey that he never found any evidence of poisoning when he examined your husband. Said it was definitely heart failure. Said he told that to anyone who would listen, but folks decided they would rather believe the more exciting story." Violet looked up at him sharply, fresh tears pricking her eyes. "The doctor said that?" "He did. He also said he feels terrible about what is happening to you. But he is 70 years old and has no power against a woman like Constance Winters when she has made up her mind about something." Quentin's expression was hard to read beneath the shadow of his hat brim. "So I figured the real story might be different from what I was hearing. And when I saw you sitting here looking like you might keel over any minute, I figured my hunch was right." "Why would you care?" Violet asked, not quite daring to hope. "You do not even know me." "No," Quentin agreed. "But I know what it is like to be judged unfairly, and I know the look of someone telling the truth versus someone spreading lies." He gestured to his horses. "I have got a ranch about 15 miles south of here. It is not much, but it is mine, and I could use help. If you are willing to work for room and board, you are welcome to come along until you figure out your next move." Violet stared at him in disbelief. "You would take me in? Just like that? After everything you have heard? I told you I do not put much stock in gossip. My ma always said you judge a person by their actions, not by what others say about them. And so far, the only action of yours I have seen is sitting here quietly instead of raging or causing trouble, which is more restraint than most would show after what you have been through." He held out his hand to help her up. "So what do you say? You can sit here and wait for who knows what, or you can come with me and at least have a roof over your head and regular meals." It was insane. She did not know this man at all. He could be dangerous, could have his own ulterior motives, but as Violet looked into Quentin Garrett's steady blue eyes, she felt something she had not felt in weeks. A flicker of trust. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was instinct, but she found herself reaching out and taking his hand. "All right," she said, "I thank you. I will work hard, I promise. I'm not afraid of labor." "I believe you," Quentin said, and helped her to her feet. He took her carpet bag and secured it to his pack horse, then mounted his own horse and reached down to pull her up behind him. Violet hesitated only a moment before accepting, settling herself on the horse's back and gripping Quentin's waist to steady herself. As they rode south, away from Bodie and its poison, Violet allowed herself to feel the smallest spark of something that might have been hope. Quentin's ranch was modest but well-maintained, nestled in a valley with a creek running through it and good grazing land for cattle. The house was small, just 4 rooms built of sturdy logs and stone. There was a barn, a chicken coop, a corral, and several outbuildings. It was clear that Quentin worked hard to keep everything running, but it was also clear that he could use an extra pair of hands. "You can have the bedroom," Quentin said as he showed her around. "I will sleep in the back room. It has got a cot and a stove, so I will be comfortable enough." "I cannot take your bed," Violet protested, but Quentin held up a hand. "It would not be proper any other way," he said firmly. "You are a guest here, and a lady besides, no matter what those fools in Bodie think. I will not have people saying I treated you poorly." Violet felt a lump rise in her throat at his simple decency. "Thank you," she managed. "You have no idea what this means to me." "You are welcome," Quentin said gruffly, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Now I will get some food started. You look like you could use a good meal." Over the next few days, they fell into an easy routine. Violet was true to her word about not being afraid of work. She cooked and cleaned, tended the chickens, helped with the garden, even learned to milk the cow. Quentin ran cattle on the open range, which meant long days away from the ranch, but he always made sure she had everything she needed before he left. In the evenings, they would share dinner and sometimes sit on the porch as the sun set, talking quietly. Violet learned that Quentin had inherited the ranch from his father 3 years ago. His mother had died when he was young, and his father had raised him alone, teaching him everything about ranching and survival. He was quiet by nature, more comfortable with animals than people. But when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and measured. He did not pry into her past, did not ask her to relive the painful details of what had happened in Bodie. He simply accepted her presence and treated her with a respect that felt almost radical after weeks of being treated like a criminal. For her part, Violet found herself slowly relaxing, the constant tension that had gripped her since Thomas's death beginning to ease. She slept better, ate better. The haunted look faded from her eyes. She began to take pride in her work, in making the small house comfortable, in preparing good meals from simple ingredients. She mended Quentin's clothes, organized his chaotic collection of tools, planted flowers near the porch. It was domestic and peaceful, and yet there was something else building between them, something neither of them spoke of but both could feel. Violet became acutely aware of Quentin's presence, of the way his eyes would linger on her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, of the care he took never to touch her unnecessarily, as if he was afraid of overstepping, of the sound of his voice in the evening, low and soothing, as he talked about his day. And Quentin, for his part, found himself thinking about Violet at odd moments, the way sunlight caught in her auburn hair, the determination in her green eyes when she tackled a difficult task, the sadness that still sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. He had meant it when he said he was offering her a place to stay out of simple decency, but he was beginning to realize that his feelings were becoming decidedly less simple. 6 weeks after Violet arrived at the ranch, everything changed. It was a hot July afternoon, and Quentin had been out checking on his cattle. He came back to the house earlier than usual, his face grim. "We have got trouble," he said as soon as he walked in. "Ran into Marcus Brennan from Bodie in the north pasture. He was on my land, looking around." Violet felt ice settle in her stomach. "What did he want?" "Said he was just passing through, but I do not believe that for a second. I think someone told him you were here, and he came to check it out." Quentin pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "I told him you were working for me and that I would appreciate it if he kept off my property in the future. He did not like that much." "I should leave," Violet said immediately, standing up from where she had been shelling peas. "I have brought trouble to your door. I will not let you suffer for helping me." "Sit down," Quentin said, his voice gentle but firm. "You are not going anywhere." "But Quentin—" "No." He came over and placed his hands on her shoulders, looking down into her face. It was the first time he had really touched her, and Violet felt the contact like a jolt of electricity. "Listen to me, Violet. I do not care what Marcus Brennan thinks. I do not care what anyone in Bodie thinks. You are welcome here for as long as you want to stay. You understand?" Violet looked up at him, at the determination in his blue eyes, and felt something inside her chest crack open. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this for me?" Quentin's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. For a long moment he just looked at her, and she could see him struggling with something, wrestling with words he was not sure he should say. Finally he spoke. "Because in the 2 months you have been here, I have come to care for you, sir," he said quietly. "More than I should, probably. More than is wise. But I cannot help it. You are brave and strong and kind, and you deserve so much better than what this world has given you. So if helping you means having trouble with folks from Bodie, then so be it. I can handle trouble." Violet felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for once they were not tears of grief or fear. "I care for you too," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I have tried not to. I told myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful for your help, but it is more than that. Quentin, I have feelings for you that I do not quite know what to do with. Something fierce and tender flashed across Quentin's face. He raised one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. You do not have to do anything with them right now, he said softly. I know you are still grieving your husband. I know you have been through hell. I am not asking for anything from you, Violet. I just wanted you to know that you are safe here, that I will protect you, that you matter to me. You matter to me too, Violet whispered. And then, before she could think better of it, she leaned up and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft, tentative, questioning. Quentin went very still for a heartbeat, and then he was kissing her back, his arms coming around her to pull her close. It was nothing like the kisses she had shared with Thomas, which had been affectionate but restrained. This was fire and intensity, months of unspoken attraction finally given voice. Violet felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. We should talk about this, he said, though he made no move to let her go. I know, Violet agreed. I know it is complicated. I know people will say it is too soon, that I should still be in mourning, but Quentin, I feel more alive right now than I have in months. Maybe that makes me terrible. Maybe that proves I am everything Constance said I was, but I cannot bring myself to regret it. You are not terrible, Quentin said fiercely. Do not ever let anyone make you feel that way. Thomas has been gone for 3 months. You have mourned him. You have paid your respects. There is no set timeline for healing, and anyone who says otherwise is a fool. Even so, we should be careful, Violet said reluctantly, stepping back slightly. If word gets back to Bodhi that we are involved, it will only make things worse. Constance will use it as proof that I am everything she claimed. Then we will be discreet, Quentin said, for now. But Violet, I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. When enough time has passed, when you are ready, I would like to court you properly. I would like to marry you if you will have me. Violet felt her breath catch. You mean that? I do not say things I do not mean, Quentin replied simply. I know we have not known each other long. I know the circumstances are not ideal. But I also know that I have never felt this way about anyone before, and I do not want to let you go. Then I will stay, Violet said, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. As long as you will have me. They were more careful after that, conscious of how things might look to outsiders. But in private, they allowed themselves to grow closer. Quentin taught Violet to ride properly, to shoot, to read the signs of changing weather. She taught him to appreciate simple domestic comforts, to slow down and notice small beauties. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They shared kisses in the evening shadows, stolen moments of tenderness that felt precious and secret. It was 3 weeks later when Marcus Brennan returned, and this time he was not alone. Violet was in the garden when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She looked up to see 6 men riding toward the ranch house, Brennan in the lead. Her heart began to pound as she recognized some of the others from the mob that had driven her out of Bodhi. Quentin emerged from the barn, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. Violet hurried over to stand beside him, and he gave her a quick, reassuring look before turning his attention to the riders. Brennan, Quentin said evenly, I thought I told you to stay off my land. We are not here to cause trouble, Garrett, Brennan said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We just want to talk. About what? About the fact that you are harboring a murderer, one of the other men spoke up. Violet recognized him as Samuel Hicks, one of Constance's neighbors. That woman killed her husband. She does not deserve protection. She deserves to be in jail. She did not kill anyone, Quentin said, his voice hard. The doctor said it was natural causes. You all chose to believe lies over facts, and that is on you. But what happens on my property is my business, and I am telling you that Violet Winters is here as my employee and guest. She is under my protection. So unless you have got a warrant or some actual evidence of wrongdoing, I suggest you turn around and leave. There are 6 of us and 1 of you, Brennan pointed out, his hand moving toward his own gun. In one smooth, lightning-fast motion, Quentin drew his revolver and had it leveled at Brennan's chest. "One of me who is a better shot than all of you put together," he said calmly. "I won the shooting competition at the Carson City Fair 3 years running. I can put 6 bullets in 6 targets faster than you can blink, so I would think real carefully about whether you want to try me." The men shifted uneasily in their saddles. Brennan's face had gone red, but he did not draw his weapon. "This is not over," he said finally. "We will tell everyone that you are protecting her. The whole territory will know." "You do that," Quentin said. "I do not care what people think." "Now get off my land before I decide you are trespassing and act accordingly." The men left, but slowly, making it clear that they were not retreating out of fear. Violet watched them go with a sinking feeling in her stomach. "This is my fault," she said when they were out of earshot. "I have brought this down on you." "No," Quentin said firmly, holstering his gun. "Constance Winters brought this down on you through her lies, and those men are choosing to perpetuate those lies. You have not done anything wrong." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I meant what I said, Violet. You are under my protection. I will not let them hurt you." "But what if they come back with more men? What if they try to burn your ranch like they threatened to do to my house?" "Then I will fight them," Quentin said simply. "And if it comes to that, we will go to the sheriff in Carson City, or even to the territorial governor if we have to. But I will not give you up to them. I will not let them destroy you." Violet felt overwhelmed by his loyalty, his strength. "I do not deserve you," she whispered. "Yes, you do," Quentin said, pulling her into his arms. "You deserve every good thing in this world, and I aim to make sure you get them." But the confrontation with Brennan had consequences. Over the next week, several of Quentin's neighbors, who had been friendly before, began to shun him. Suppliers in the nearby town of Bridgeport started refusing to sell to him. Someone spread a rumor that he and Violet had been having an affair even before Thomas's death, that they had conspired together to kill her husband for his property. It was absurd, but people believed it, or at least claimed to. Quentin bore it all with stoic determination, but Violet could see the toll it was taking. She began to seriously consider leaving, slipping away in the night so he would not have to make the choice between her and his livelihood. But every time she started to form the plan, she would look at Quentin and see the quiet certainty in his eyes, the absolute conviction that they would get through this together, and she would lose her nerve. It was Quentin who finally proposed the solution. They were sitting on the porch one August evening watching the stars come out when he spoke. "Marry me," he said. Violet turned to look at him in surprise. "What?" "Marry me," Quentin repeated, taking her hand. "I know we talked about waiting, about being proper, but I think that ship has sailed. People are already assuming the worst. So let us give them something to talk about that is actually true. Let us get married and make this official." "Quentin, I cannot ask you to do that. People will say you are crazy for marrying me." "People are already saying I am crazy. At least this way, you will have legal protection as my wife. They cannot force you out of your home again if it is legally mine and I invite you to stay. And more than that, I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. If people do not like it, that is their problem." Violet felt tears streaming down her face again. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," Quentin said. He got down on one knee right there on the porch, still holding her hand. "Violet Winters, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" "Yes," Violet said, the word coming out as half sob, half laugh. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a week later by a traveling preacher who did not know about the scandal in Bodie and did not care when Quentin gave him a brief, edited version of events. It was a simple ceremony with no guests, just the two of them, and the preacher and his wife as a witness. Violet wore a simple blue dress, and Quentin wore his best shirt and his father's old string tie. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Quentin kissed her, Violet felt like she was finally, truly free. That night, as they lay together in the bed that was now legally theirs to share, Quentin held Violet close and stroked her hair. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Violet said, meaning it with her whole heart. "For the first time since Thomas died, I feel like I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Me too," Quentin said, and kissed her forehead. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." What came next was both better and worse than either of them expected. On one hand, their marriage seemed to take some of the wind out of the gossip. It was harder to condemn a properly married couple, even if the marriage had happened quickly. Some people, particularly those who did not know the full story, simply accepted that Quentin had married a widow and moved on. Others continued to whisper and judge, but from a distance now, as if the legal bond somehow gave Violet a shield she had not had before. On the other hand, Constance Winters was not done. When she heard about the marriage, she flew into a rage. She began spreading new rumors claiming that Quentin must be a fool or under some kind of spell, that Violet would kill him just as she had killed Thomas. She even tried to take legal action, attempting to have the wedding invalidated on the grounds that Violet was a murderer and should not be allowed to remarry. But this time, she had overplayed her hand. When the territorial judge reviewed her petition, he demanded evidence. Constance produced the bottle of rat poison she claimed to have found, but when it was examined, it was clearly new with no residue that would indicate it had been used. She claimed to have heard Thomas accuse Violet on his deathbed, but she could produce no witnesses to corroborate this. The doctor's report clearly stated natural causes, and when the judge learned that Constance had led a mob to drive Violet out of her own home without any legal proceeding, he was not sympathetic. The petition was denied. More than that, the judge issued a public statement that there was no evidence of foul play in Thomas Winters' death, and that anyone continuing to spread rumors to the contrary could be sued for slander. It was not quite a full exoneration, but it was enough. When the news reached the ranch, Violet broke down in tears of relief. "It is over," she kept saying. "It is finally over." "Not quite," Quentin said gently. "People will still remember. Some will always believe the worst. But yes, the legal threat is over. You are safe now." And she was. As autumn turned the leaves gold and red, Violet settled into her new life as Mrs. Garrett. She learned to love the ranch, to take pride in the work she did. She grew strong and tanned from long days outside, her hands calloused but capable. She and Quentin worked side by side, building something together, creating a home that was truly theirs. They did not go to Bodie. There was no reason to, and neither of them had any desire to see the town that had treated Violet so cruelly. But occasionally they heard news from travelers passing through. They heard that Constance had become something of a pariah herself after the judge's ruling, that people were starting to question whether she had been telling the truth all along. They heard that several people from the mob had expressed private regret, though none had the courage to apologize publicly. They heard that Clara Jensen, the woman who had warned Violet, had stood up in church one Sunday and said that she thought the town owed Violet Winters Garrett an apology, and had been shunned by some for her trouble. "I should write to her," Violet said when they heard this. "Clara. She was kind to me when no one else was." "That is a good idea," Quentin agreed. "You could invite her to visit if she's ever out this way." Violet did write a long letter thanking Clara for her courage and inviting her to the ranch. Clara wrote back, expressing her joy that Violet had found happiness and promising to visit when she could. It was a small connection, but it mattered. It was proof that not everyone had turned against her, that there was still good in the world. As winter closed in, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Quentin on a cold December evening as they sat by the fire, nervous about his reaction, but his face lit up with such pure joy that her fears evaporated instantly. "A baby," he said, pulling her into his arms. "We are going to have a baby." Are you happy? Violet asked, though she could see the answer on his face. Happy? Violet, I am over the moon. This is everything I ever wanted. A wife I love, a child on the way, a home we built together. I feel like the luckiest man alive. Violet laughed, feeling the same wild happiness. I love you, she said. I know I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you so much, Quentin Garrett. I love you too, Quentin said, and kissed her deeply. More than words can say. The baby, a boy they named Jacob, after Quentin's father, was born in early July of 1884 on a hot afternoon with a midwife from Bridgeport in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, but when Violet finally heard her son's first cry, every moment of pain was forgotten. Quentin held the baby with such tenderness, such awe, that Violet fell in love with him all over again. He is perfect, Quentin whispered, carefully cradling Jacob in his strong hands. He is absolutely perfect. He has your eyes, Violet said, exhausted but happy. Look, they are the same blue. Over the next months, they fell into a new rhythm as parents. Quentin was surprisingly natural with the baby, never complaining about sleepless nights or endless crying. Violet had worried that the demands of an infant might put a strain on their marriage, but instead it seemed to deepen their bond. They worked together, supported each other, found joy in small moments like Jacob's first smile or the way he gripped their fingers with his tiny hands. Clara Jensen did finally visit when Jacob was 6 months old, bringing her own infant daughter with her. It was wonderful to have another woman to talk to, someone who understood both the challenges and the joys of motherhood. Clara stayed for a week, and by the time she left, she and Violet had cemented a true friendship. You seem happy, Clara said on her last morning, as they sat together watching the children. Truly happy. I am, Violet said simply. I never thought I would be after everything that happened, but Quentin gave me a second chance at life. He believed me when no one else would. He loved me when I thought I was unlovable. How could I not be happy? He is a good man, Clara agreed, and you are good together. Anyone can see that. She paused, then added, For what it is worth, many people in Bodie feel ashamed now. They know they were wrong about you. Constance barely leaves her house anymore. She is a broken woman. Violet felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, to revel in Constance's downfall, but mostly she just felt sad. She lost her son, she said quietly. I can understand that grief, even if I cannot forgive what she did to me. I hope she finds peace. You are more generous than she deserves, Clara said. Maybe, but holding on to anger would only poison my happiness. I have too much to be grateful for to waste time on bitterness. It was true. As the months turned into years, Violet found that the pain of what had happened in Bodie faded to a distant ache, something she could acknowledge without letting it define her. She and Quentin prospered, expanding the ranch, building a larger house, adding to their herd. They had 2 more children, daughters named Margaret and Sarah, born 2 years apart. The house filled with laughter and noise and the beautiful chaos of family life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Quentin surprised Violet with a gift. It was a legal document, transferring half ownership of the ranch to her name. I should have done this when we married, he said as she stared at the papers in shock. But I am doing it now. This ranch is as much yours as it is mine. You have worked just as hard to build it. You deserve to have your name on it. Violet felt tears prick her eyes. After everything she had lost, everything that had been taken from her, this felt like a reclamation. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means more to me than you know. I know exactly what it means, Quentin said, taking her in his arms. It means you are not just my wife. You are my partner, my equal, and I want the whole world to know it. They celebrated that night after the children were asleep, toasting with whiskey on the porch where Quentin had first proposed. Violet looked out at the land they had built together, at the life they had created, and felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not found you on that road? Quentin asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sometimes, Violet admitted. I think about how lost I was, how hopeless. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what would have happened to me. You would have survived, Quentin said with certainty. You are the strongest person I know. You would have found a way. Maybe. But I would not have found this. I would not have found you, or this life, or this happiness. So I thank God every day for that morning, for the twist of fate that brought us together. It was not fate, Quentin said, kissing her temple. It was choice. I chose to believe you. You chose to trust me. We both chose to fight for what we have. That is not luck or destiny. That is us, deciding what kind of life we wanted and refusing to let anyone take it away. He was right, Violet realized. They had chosen this, had fought for it, had built it with their own hands and hearts, and that made it all the more precious. Years continued to pass, marked by the small and large moments that make up a life. Jacob grew tall and serious, with his father's thoughtfulness and his mother's determination. Margaret was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and chasing after the ranch hands. Sarah was quiet and observant, noticing everything. The children grew up knowing they were loved, knowing they were safe. They knew the story of how their parents met. Though Violet carefully edited out the worst parts for their young ears, they knew their mother had been through hard times before finding happiness. They knew their father was a hero who had done the right thing when others would not. Constance Winters died in the winter of 1890, alone and bitter, according to reports. When Violet heard the news, she felt only a distant sadness. She wrote a brief letter of condolence to the few relatives Constance had left, more out of courtesy than any real feeling. Quentin read the letter and nodded approvingly. You are a better person than most, he said. I am just glad it is truly over, Violet replied. That chapter of my life is closed. All that matters now is this. She gestured around at their home, their children playing in the yard, the life they had built. This is my story now, not what happened in Bodie. This. As their children grew older, Violet and Quentin found new rhythms. They taught their children to ride, to work, to respect the land and the animals. They passed on lessons about kindness and justice, about standing up for what is right even when it is difficult. They showed them, through their actions more than words, what a loving marriage looked like. When Jacob was 16, a young man came to the ranch looking for work. His name was Peter, and he had a haunted look in his eyes that Violet recognized. She learned that he had been falsely accused of theft in his hometown and driven out. Without hesitation, she and Quentin took him in, gave him work, gave him a chance to prove himself. It felt like completing a circle, paying forward the kindness that had been shown to her. Peter worked for them for 3 years and eventually moved on to start his own place, forever grateful for the Garretts who had believed him when others would not. He was not the only one. Over the years, Violet and Quentin became known as people who gave second chances, who judged fairly, who helped those in need. It became part of their legacy. On their 20th anniversary, Quentin and Violet took a rare trip away from the ranch, leaving the children in the care of their eldest, who was now 23 and more than capable. They traveled to San Francisco, stayed in a proper hotel, saw the sights. It was decadent and strange and wonderful. One evening, as they walked along the waterfront watching the sunset, Quentin pulled Violet close. Do you ever regret any of it? He asked. Not just the hard parts, but all of it. If you could go back and change things, would you? Violet thought about it seriously. She thought about Thomas, who had been kind, but never made her heart race the way Quentin did. She thought about Bodie and the nightmare Constance had created. She thought about the fear and pain and loss. No, she said finally, I would not change it. Because all of it led me to you, to us, to our children, and our life and everything we have built together. I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here. Good, Quentin said, smiling, because I feel the same way. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Violet Garrett. 20 years, and I love you more now than I did on the day we married." 20 years, Violet echoed, marveling at how the time had passed. "And I love you more with each one." They returned to the ranch to find everything running smoothly and their children happy to see them, but also a bit smug about how well they had managed without parental supervision. It was exactly as it should be. Their children were growing up, becoming independent, preparing for their own lives. Jacob married at 25, bringing home a sweet-natured girl named Emma from Bridgeport. They built a house on the far edge of the Garrett property and started their own family. Margaret declared she was never getting married and set off to work as a teacher in Carson City, much to everyone's surprise. Sarah married a rancher from Montana and moved north, writing long letters home about her adventures. As Violet and Quentin entered their 50s, they began to slow down, letting Jacob take over more of the ranch operations while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the peace they had earned. They still worked, still stayed active, but there was less urgency now. They had built something that would last beyond them. They had created a legacy. One autumn afternoon, 27 years after they first met, Violet and Quentin sat together on the porch they had shared for so many evenings. The sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink, painting the mountains in fire. "Do you remember the day we met?" Violet asked, leaning against Quentin's shoulder. "When you found me sitting on that rock, ready to give up?" "I remember," Quentin said, his arm around her waist. "I remember thinking you looked lost but determined. I remember knowing somehow that you were someone special. I thought you were crazy for offering to help me, for believing me when everyone else thought I was a monster." "Best crazy decision I ever made," Quentin said with a smile. "You gave me a family, Violet. You gave me a purpose beyond just survival. You made my life mean something." "You saved my life," Violet said simply. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me back my dignity, my hope, my future. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable." "You were always lovable," Quentin corrected gently. "You were always worthy of love and respect and happiness. I just made sure you knew it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into evening. Violet thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from the nightmare in Bodie to this perfect moment. She thought about all the people who had hurt her and all the people who had helped her. She thought about the choices that had shaped her life, both the ones she had made and the ones that had been made for her, but mostly she thought about the man beside her, whose faith in her had never wavered, whose love had been constant and true. Quentin Garrett, who had seen her at her lowest and had chosen to lift her up, who had given her a home, a family, a life beyond her wildest dreams. "I love you," she said, the same words she had said thousands of times over the years, but they never lost their meaning. "I love you too," Quentin replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Violet felt a contentment so deep it seemed to fill every part of her. She had survived betrayal and loss. She had endured cruelty and injustice. She had been cast out and condemned, but she had also known great love. She had built a family. She had created a home. She had lived a life worth living, and it had all started with a cowboy who believed her when no one else would. The years continued to be kind to them. Violet and Quentin lived to see their grandchildren grow and even met a few great-grandchildren before the end. They stayed on the ranch they loved, in the house they had built together, surrounded by family and the proof of all they had accomplished. When Quentin passed away in his sleep at the age of 78, Violet grieved deeply but without regret. They had been married for 43 years, and every one of those years had been a gift. She missed him terribly, but she knew how lucky she had been to have him at all. She lived another 5 years, staying on the ranch with Jacob and his family, spending her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the Wild West they had never known. She told them about hard times and good times, about cruelty and kindness, about the power of believing in someone when the whole world turns against them. and she told them about a cowboy named Quentin Garrett who had once offered his hand to a desperate woman on a dusty road, and in doing so, had changed both their lives forever. When Violet Garrett passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 81, surrounded by 4 generations of family, they buried her next to Quentin on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line, "Together in life and death." Their children and grandchildren continued to run the ranch for generations after, always remembering the story of how it all began. It became a family legend passed down through the years. The tale of Violet, who had been wrongly accused and cast out, and Quentin, who had believed her when no one else would. The story of how love and faith can triumph over hatred and lies. The story of how 2 people, brought together by tragedy, had built something beautiful and lasting. And in the high country of Nevada, on the ranch they had carved out of wilderness and watered with their sweat and tears, their legacy lived on. A testament to the power of choosing kindness over cruelty, truth over lies, love over fear. It was a story worth remembering, a story worth retelling, a story that proved that even in the hardest times, in the roughest places, goodness can prevail if we are brave enough to fight for it. And it all started with a simple act of faith on a dusty road in 1883, when a cowboy chose to believe and a woman chose to trust, and together they built a love story for the ages.